release available at the back of the room. It's also published on the CTA website, and it's been distributed by mail to many of you. If you don't have that mail, then let me know, because it also has some links to some other useful information. The report itself is available at the back of the room. There are copies available in a pile at the back of the room. That's the yellow publication that you see at the back of the room. You should also know that on Friday morning there'll be a policy symposium, new opportunities for regional food markets and food trade in Africa, which will take a much more in-depth look at the report, and indeed there'll be some further discussion around the general topic and the report itself. Our panelists will take questions after they've spoken, and when if you have questions, please indicate clearly your name and affiliation, and one of my colleagues here, if not myself, will hand around the microphone. So, I'm pleased to have with us Michael Hailu, who's the director of CTA, and excuse my pronunciation in advance, Dr. Getal Tades Gebriohannes, who's research fellow at IFPRI, and who can speak to more of the detail of the report. So without further ado, let me please invite Michael Hailu, the director of CTA, to say some words.
Thank you, Toby. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning on the launch of the African Agricultural Trade Monitor. As you know, increasing trade, whether it's at the regional or continental or even global level, can bring benefits to populations in Africa, especially rural populations in Africa, where a lot of the poverty is prevalent. We believe that agriculture can also boost industrialization and enhance competitiveness. This year, of course, you might recall that the African Continental Free Trade Area has been approved by the African Union member countries, and this has brought the issue of trade to the forefront, the importance of trade to the forefront. And potentially this will involve about $2.3 trillion in GDP, and about 1.2 billion people when this whole thing becomes operational. So the potential is quite enormous. You might also know that Malabo Declaration, that the African leaders set a target on different parameters, and one of them is to triple intra-African trade by 2025. However, the African Union conducted the biennial review of the implementation of the Malabo Declaration, and on this particular parameter, only 3 out of the 29 countries that have reported were able to say that they are on target. They needed to be at least 20% growth rate to achieve those targets. So obviously there is a huge delay in achieving the targets when it comes to intra-regional trade. So we need enabling policies like the CFTA that will help to open up the continent for new investments and provide opportunities for its entrepreneurs. So it's really critical to support intra-regional trade. So to maximize the benefits of regional integration, look for new opportunities for competitiveness. Policymakers and the private sector, also development partners working in this area, they need access to accurate and comprehensive data on intra and inter-regional trade with respect to agricultural goods and services. So it's where this agricultural trade monitor comes in. It's the first of its kind. This is the first effort really to provide comprehensive data on agricultural trade in Africa. And basically what the report tries to do is it examines the current status, the trends and outlook in African trade performance, and it makes an important contribution towards data and analysis of developments both at the regional and the continental level. So as you know, one of the key themes of the HRF 2018 is measured. major growth leader. And this report provides a very vital source of analysis and evidence that contributes to measurement in terms of regional trade. So this is, as Toby said, a collaboration between the International Food Policy Research Institute, IFPRI, and CTA, my own organization. We really value the importance of reliable data and analysis to help policy decisions. So we started this work a couple of years ago. It took some time to compile. And the first report, the first initial findings were presented in Brussels, where we have regular briefings with the European Commission and the Committee of Ambassadors of ACP, that's African, Caribbean, Pacific Group, and the policymakers thought that this kind of information will be absolutely valuable and critical. So we have been developing this work and trying to improve the quality. We hope that the findings will drive important policy measures that will help African countries to benefit fully from intra-African and regional trade, as well as global trade. The full detail will be presented by Dr. Guetao, but just to highlight some of the key findings, despite the increase in agricultural trade deficits, there are some promising signs in terms of export diversification, both in commodities traded and the trade partners, as well as increasing intra-African trade in agricultural commodities. So intra-regional trade in Africa is increasing, but it's still very low compared to what you see in Europe and Asia, where it's up to 60-70%. So in Africa, it's still very low. Of course, the regional integration drive has helped to increase trade in agricultural commodities. So to boost both global and intra-regional trade, governments need to act to raise productivity across the entire value chain and reduce trade costs and eliminate barriers to trade. So there are a number of recommendations coming out of the report, which include allocating greater public expenditure to agriculture and to agricultural research to help increase productivity, harmonize regulations, and decreasing barriers to trade, and providing an enabling environment for value chain development by strengthening market institutions and investing in infrastructure, which includes also digital infrastructure. So another critical aspect for export, especially at the global level, is to improve food safety and traceability standards. So again, we are very happy to be involved in this work with IFPRI. And we have an excellent partnership, and I must say that one thing that really makes this possible is a strong research analytical capacity among African experts that have been developed over the years as part of the support that IFPRI had in the implementation of the Comprehensive African Agricultural Development Program, CAADP. So that capacity will be crucial as we move forward with the implementation of the Continental Free Trade Area and other regional trade agreements. So this is a strong capacity, I think, that governments have to continue and exploit and use. So it's really exciting to have that most of the contributions of the work was made by African experts, and of course Dr. Guetao being one of them, he will give us more details. Finally, I'd like to thank other institutions that have been supportive of this initiative. Of course, AGRA, I think Vanessa is there. I don't know why she could have joined us here.
Thank you.
But basically, yeah, so it's very, we're very happy that they accommodate the release of this report here. The plan is to have this report annually and to present it at the AGRF. So we hope that this will be a regular feature of this report. Of course, other institutions like USAID, BMZ have made important important contributions, and we hope that they will continue to support this exercise as we move forward, because we believe this will be a critical source of data and analysis for policymakers. So that's what I like to say, and I invite Dr. Gita.
Michael, actually, if I could ask Vanessa to take the floor for the moment, because I understand that she has a pressing appointment in 10 or 15 minutes. Thank you for joining us at this late notice, Vanessa. I'll hand over the floor to you.
Thank you very much. I'm quite honored to be on this esteemed panel and commenting on this fantastic report, and my congratulations to all the authors and the contributors. This issue of regional trade and competitiveness in trade is absolutely essential to the well-being of all the smallholder farmers that we're here talking about. There are many efforts, trade agreements, supporting agencies which have been working to link Africa to all of the continents in a more formal and organized fashion and provide trade agreements which facilitate increased trade. And I think we've been lacking a reporting mechanism which consolidates this information and aligns it. And so I think this initiative is absolutely essential. It's fantastic. And in fact, I walked directly out of the plenary session here at the AGRF to come here, where the discussion was live with Dangote, with DSM, with Syngenta, OCP, KCB, and the conversation, and African Development Bank, and the conversation was exactly to the point of how do we drive investment into Africa. And I think that we'll find that the gaps in trade competitiveness are very, very directly linked to investment requirements to reach scale. You can confirm the data, because I know that Dr. Getachew and Dr. Michael Hyden will underscore the importance of reaching scale in order to have competitiveness. And all of these major international and multinational firms today are trying to source directly with smallholder farmers and increase the scale of sourcing in Africa. And so the criteria and the harmonization amongst the countries which have been signed up to in all of the regional economic communities, and of course underscored by the recent signature of the Continental Free Trade Area. And so it's an exciting time to be here in Rwanda talking about the Continental Free Trade Area and having a report of this nature, because all of us and all the governments in Africa are very, very eager to have evidence to underscore their regulatory reforms and to be able to support the very, very sensitive balance between food security and food availability and the economic growth requirements and income drivers, which are supported and very, very directly linked to free trade. And so again, launching this in Rwanda is also very relevant, because Rwanda, being a landlocked country, being completely dependent on the trade routes in and out of here, underscores the importance of this issue. So I've spent many, many years working in West Africa as well as Ethiopia and Southern Africa. I've personally gone up and down the corridors where the trade is supposedly free, and all of you know as well as I do that when you're at the border watching the processing procedures of the customs agents, of the various SPS monitoring and controlling bodies, of the oversight rules and regulations, the verifications of what is free trade, what is processed in Africa, where are the controls. The details really, really matter, and we have overlapping mandates and agencies. Customs needs to take their role up and be the lead and streamline all the other agencies behind it. So there's a lot of discussion on this. Tomorrow we have a panel on this, actually, on regional trade policy, and I invite you all to join us and underscore the importance and also the real opportunity to bring private sector to the table, engage the dialogue with the governments, and use the data which is available, but also the successes which are happening. They are not at the scale we all hope. The numbers aren't getting to the macro numbers that we expect, but there has been progress, and I think that progress is underscored and visible. So I commend this effort. I hope to be a contributor or editor myself to next year's report, and if there is any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Yeah, so my name is Sarah from the SADC for you, it's the non-tariff barriers that are hindering that trade.
Yes, non-tariff barriers are absolutely undermining many of the trade agreements. The non-tariff barriers are extremely burdensome on agriculture, and I think that it's an unnecessary burden. We could be creating a green line, for example, where we accelerate processing for agricultural commodities, just like we do for health products like critical medicine. It gets streamlined and it gets processed very quickly because it's considered life or death. Why isn't agriculture considered part of life and death? So we can definitely streamline the risk, for example, of contamination. In my experience of a commodity crossing borders in most of the countries we're talking about, the pesticide contamination or residues or even mycotoxins or other risks that might hamper people's health are already crossing the borders. It doesn't wait for the border post to come and monitor it. And we know that the animals also walk every day back and forth across the borders, as the livestock and the cattle in many of these countries are as populous as the people. So I think we really should focus and find very, very clear ways to accelerate the trade, and there are very practical examples of what can be done. And some countries have taken the leadership on this, and I think some countries have historically been barriers for various reasons which have political underpinnings or otherwise. So I think SACU is an example in Southern Africa, which has actually integrated and taken up the customs union in the way that it was intended, and the European Union recognized that with the EPA and the Everything But Arms trade agreements, which is, I think, a first for a regional body in Africa as opposed to doing bilaterals. And those bilateral trade agreements actually, in my opinion, make an extra burden for the regional economic communities. So this is an area which we can also perhaps highlight in a future report.
Because Dr. Adams is going to have to leave us fairly shortly, I think, I'll ask if there are any other questions for her at this point before we move on to Dr. Getau, who will be providing more of the detail of the report. So are there any further questions, Dr. Adams, before we move on?
Appreciate the title of doctor, but it's simply Vanessa Adams.
Okay.
I'll take an honorary doctorate in the future if my dear friends in Ethiopia would please. But I would just say that one of the last comments in the plenary upstairs, which I found to be very relevant, was that we've been talking about farm to fork traceability, and DSM actually said, why aren't we doing fork to farm? And I've also said that. Let's do reverse traceability. Why can't the consumer demands and needs be much more visible at the farm level? Technology is available and it's there, and we could definitely use the technology platforms to really create much more accelerated communication between consumer demands and needs, specialized markets. We can actually bypass some of the traditional trade channels and accelerate trade also in that fashion.
Excellent. In which case, thank you very much for joining
Thank you very
us
much.
this morning.
I would like a signed copy by the authors, please, and I'll take it home.
We'll
Thank you
take
very
care
much.
of that. Thank you very much.
Yes.
And we have the signing ceremony. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. If you can leave the microphone there with Dr. Getau. Thank you. In which case, I'll hand over to Dr. Getau, who will provide some more in-depth detail on the report. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me to these sessions, and we are very much happy that we come up with this report, which is very intense, and it covers a lot of issues. And as many of you know, that we have a lot of analysis on African agricultural trade analysis, and actually we have been doing some aid analysis now. We are turning to agricultural trade analysis. That is an interesting improvement over years in Africa. And there have been a lot of research that have been done on African agricultural trade. But this research, they have never been, exhaustive and comprehensive, and they are not really taking some of the contexts that's evolving within Africa, so that it was very difficult to bring into discussions among policymakers and practitioners and development programs. So when, thanks to the African head of states who have been identified trade as an African agenda during the Malabo declarations, and then following that declarations, and trade has been recognized as one of the few thematic areas that has to be given emphasis for Africa to accelerate agricultural growth and transformation in Africa, so that we can feed our people, so that we can contribute to economic growth and even to create job opportunities. So having that as a background, we started to collaborate with CTA. IFRI has collaborated with CTA to look at the trends, patterns, and also the outlooks and determinants of African agricultural trade in order to provide some evidences for policy discussions and policy makers. So as you said, so we started to organize these things. So many of the chapters, I think, is written by the African experts, and that's one of the additional insight that we can look at from this report, that many of the chapters have been contributed by the African researchers, and which was the result of a lot of supports from IFRI through AgroDev and through research. So AgroDev is just a consortium of modelers, African experts who are trying to exercise their modeling exercise and come up with some policy recommendations and all these things. So these are the things that we have seen. So if I look at the major findings of our report, I think we are just looking at the trends from 1990s to the current times. So we are looking at over time and across different commodities and across different markets. The markets at regional level. When I say regional level, between ECOWAS, COMESA, SADC countries. When I say intra-African, I'm referring to the continental trades, the whole continent. And we have also another market, the global markets. So we looked at all the three markets for the last, I think, 20 years. And then from that we realized that African agricultural export is increasing. It has tripled for the last 20 years, 20 to 15 years. And it has become also more diversified. If you just simply compare the 1998 and the 2013 data, so in 1998, of the top 10 commodities in Africa, covers about like 60% of the African agricultural export. But in 2013, the 10 top commodities in Africa cover only 40% of agricultural exports. So this is an improvement that we are depending on much diversified agricultural commodities. No, we are not depending on few commodities as it was before 20 years ago. So these are one. The other one is the share of intra-African agricultural trade. That is the share out of the total African agricultural export. It has been about 30%. Now we are about 20%. So that is an increase by doubling over years. So the other important aspect that we looked at from the report is the competitiveness of countries for agricultural exports. So many African countries, more than half of the African agriculture, the African countries are gaining competitiveness in African markets, within African markets. So that is a good indicator of the opportunity for Africa to expand its markets, and it's an opportunity for Africans to utilize the increasing demand that is growing in Africa. So the data show that competitiveness in African markets is increasing and progressing over time. And also the other thing is we are gaining even some competitiveness in new products like soybean oils and wool, all these products. So African countries are gaining some competitiveness in global markets. These are some of the positive things that we observed through the report, and there are also other issues that have to be considered by policymakers. For example, the deficit, the import and export deficit is growing. While export is growing by 3 times, and the food import is growing by 5 times. This is mainly associated with the increasing demand for food because of increase in population and because of increased income in African countries. It's not because the agriculture is lagging. Agriculture is growing, but at the same time, the population is growing, the level of income is also growing. And the other one is, even though the share of African trade, within African trade is increasing, still we are very much behind from other regions. If you compare Africa with Asians and Europeans and also Latin Americans, still the share of trade is very, very low. I mean, which is 20% the maximum that we observe. And also, if you look at some of the share of Africa out of the total agricultural trade in the world, still is it's just up and down between 3.5% to 4%, which is very low compared to the potential we have in terms of agricultural productions and agricultural resource endowments. So these are the things that we observe, and some of the factors that contribute to these things are mainly related to agricultural productivity, and mostly they are from the supply side constraints. The supply side constraints are about like the productivity in terms of yield per hectare, and also other infrastructure problems related to port quality, and also institutional inefficiencies related to like the export clearing efficiencies, the number of days and the number of documents required to clear export is much higher in Africa compared to other countries. These are some of the findings that we saw. So these are the things that policymakers have to give attention so that they can boost agricultural trades both within the continent and also outside the continents. And also there are encouraging developments in terms of, as I said before, urbanization is increasing in Africa, which is an opportunity for African markets, and also agro-processing plants are increasing within Africa. So these are the things that we can see, some of the things. So we have also finally we made some projections for the West African countries. So we were looking at what will be done and what should be done for the next 10 years to achieve the target that's set by the Malabo Declaration by 2025. That is tripling African agricultural trades. So we looked at some of the policy like increasing productivity, agricultural productivity. A 10% increase in agricultural productivity increases agricultural trade by more than 10%, even up to 50%, depending on the type of crops and type of commodities and all these things. So these are some of the encouraging results that we have to look at while we're thinking of expanding the African markets. So these are the things that we have found. I think the details is in the book. I think it's better to look at that because it's very difficult to present all the findings. There are a lot of interesting findings within the book. And one thing that I want to emphasize is that this is a report. It's the first report, but we are planning to continue it annually. So it's an annual report series so that we can update some of emerging issues and all these things. And we are also very happy to launch the book at this conference, because it's very highly related to agribusiness. The area of conference is all about agribusiness, expanding agribusiness. So this is part of the agribusiness areas where Africa has the opportunity to expand to trade and other food security issues. Yeah. Thank you. So if you have it.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Gatta, for trying to summarise what's a very detailed report. I certainly encourage you to pick up a copy, and obviously if you have any further questions after you've managed to digest it, then please let us know, and we can try and put you in touch with one of the authors. I'd like to throw the floor open to questions from the assembled press. Does anybody have any questions for either Dr. Gatta or for Michael? Okay, Sarah. I'll hand you the microphone this time, Sarah.
My name is Sarah Kimani from the South African Broadcasting. I wanted to find out, so what is the value? How much is Africa making out of the intra-African trade, the exports they are doing? And what, so first for intra-Africa, and second for what they are able to sell outside. We know we're already importing 40 billion. So what are we exporting to the world? What is the value of that? And in the light of the trade, the CFTA, what would you recommend to African governments to do to increase trade in food items?
Shall I respond? I think the value is about 45 billion export, and the import is about 62 billion in 2013. Maybe this has been changed for because we are using the 2013 data. So we see some deficit. That's definitely the case, and then unfortunately the deficit is increasing over time, and for the reason that I have mentioned before. And for the CFTA, I think many of our analysis supports the idea of continental integration as opposed to, I mean, other local integrations. Because the bigger the market, the more successful, the more competitive will be the continents. So how to expand all these things? I think there are a lot of initiatives that has been going on in Africa. One of them is just the tri-party agreement, which is part of the continental integrations. So expanding all these things, and also the continental free trade agreement is important in terms of, for example, from our analysis, tariffs and non-tariffs, they are not important for African trades, within African trades. But if you are thinking of the global trades, or if you are global markets, the tariffs and the non-tariff barriers, they are very, very crucial. So the African countries, they have to organize themselves so that comply with the international standards and safeties and all these things. Because as we look at it, the cost of complying with requirements and standards will be lower if countries organize themselves through regional integration, through regs and all these things. So these are a lot of recommendations that we derive in the report. At country level, they have to focus on increasing agricultural productivities and also reducing trade costs and all these things. At regional level, we have to continue on having this regional integration so that the cost of these negotiations and agreements will be lower. At the global levels, we have also identified some interventions, and which including expanding global agreements and global negotiations through using multilateral and bilateral forums. These are the things that we forwarded in the report. I think the details is inside. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Gatta. Michael, would you like to add anything at this point, or should I? Michael, would you like to add anything at this point? Would you like to add anything at this point? Or no? Okay. In which case, again, are there any further questions from the floor? Sarah, you've got a follow-up question.
Yeah,
Okay.
value addition. If you look at what we are sending out, if it's coffee, we are sending it as beans, and then they send it to us back as real coffee. So what did you find in terms of value addition? How is that impacting?
Yeah, this is an important question because we were looking at, I think, one important differentiation between what we are sending to the global market and what we are trading within Africa, and we are sending raw products to the global markets. But the good thing with the within African trade is we are trading more processed products, prepared products. But this trend is being changed even for the global trades. For example, if you take coffee and cacao, all these things, and the cacao beans, the volume of is not growing as much as the processed ones. The processed ones are growing, like the processed coffees, processed cacao beans, and all these things. So I think we are moving towards value addition. I think the continent is moving towards value addition. And but the good thing with the African market is that's also an input for encouraging this continental trade. Is many of the products that we are trading, that Africa is trading within the continents, are more of value-added products and prepared products, so that encourages the value additions, and it's also good for job creations and employment, all these things. So I think this, when I said we, I'm referring to Africa.
Thank you very much for that answer, Dr. Getao. Are there any other questions from the audience here today? If not, then I might have one. No, just maybe one other question then to wrap up. I noticed that the report makes a recommendation for research, for greater funds for research at least. And what are the next proof points that you think policymakers need? What are the sorts of research, it's agricultural research, that you think that research institutes need to focus on to drive that trade agenda and convince more enabling policies?
Yeah, policies, I think, policies, I think, one of the issues that's important from the book is the allocation of agricultural government expenditure. So I think there are a lot of issues how to allocate. I think it's not about the 10%, but even with the 10% that's the government is allocating for agriculture, where should we allocate? I mean, we did some analysis for different countries. Some countries, they allocate for export commodities, export products, some for food products. So there is always a trade-off on these issues. So research may think of how to best allocate the government fund so that we can optimize both the agribusiness export orientation and at the same time food security within the boundary of the country. So these are some of the issues that has to be considered for further research to focus. And also maybe I think mainly